Night at Khe Sanh pressed down like a weight, thick with mist, cordite, and the low rumble of artillery. By early 1968, the remote U.S. Marine base near the Laotian border had become a magnet for North Vietnamese ambition and American resolve. Surrounded by jungle and hills that belonged to the enemy, Khe Sanh was mud, steel, fear, and endurance. The wire that encircled it looked formidable in daylight, rows of concertina, trip flares, and listening posts, but under cover of darkness, wire was only metal. It could be cut, crawled under, or breached. When that happened, Marines inside would have seconds, not minutes, to respond. The siege crept in quietly at first, a patient buildup. North Vietnamese units moved into the hills months in advance, digging trenches, hauling artillery by hand, positioning mortars and rockets with meticulous care. Intelligence warned of a buildup, but the exact timing of the storm remained unknown. Some feared Khe Sanh would become another Dien Bien Phu. Others believed American firepower would make that impossible. The truth was somewhere in between, written not just by bombs and artillery, but by small weapons placed in the mud just beyond the wire. When the first heavy bombardments hit in January 1968, the base shook like a living thing. Artillery slammed into bunkers, ammo dumps, and living quarters. Marines learned to tell incoming rounds apart by sound, counting seconds, gauging distance, bracing for impact. The airstrip became a cratered ribbon of dirt, barely usable under constant fire. Supplies arrived by parachute when planes couldn't land, drifting through smoke and shrapnel like fragile lifelines. Every resupply run was a gamble. Every day survived felt borrowed. The real fear came at night. Artillery could kill, but infantry attacks were intimate. They meant hands on wire, breath in the dark, whispers just yards away. North Vietnamese soldiers were experts at night infiltration, crawling silently, sometimes naked to avoid snagging gear, carrying Bangalore torpedoes to blow gaps in the wire. They tested every weakness. Marines on listening posts lay motionless for hours, straining to hear anything that did not belong to the jungle. A snapped twig, a shifted stone, a breath where no breath should be any of it could mean the perimeter was about to be tested. The wire was designed to slow, to channel, to expose. It was never meant to stop a determined enemy. And at Khe Sanh, the enemy was as determined as they come. Sappers cut lanes through obstacles with precision. Trip flares popped uselessly into the fog. Claymore mines, however, waited silently, deadly, pointed toward the darkness. The M18 Claymore was simple, brutally effective. A curved plastic shell, packed with hundreds of steel balls embedded in explosive. When detonated, it did not explode in all directions like a grenade. It fired forward in a lethal fan, capable of tearing through flesh, equipment, and resolve. Properly placed, it turned the ground in front of it into a killing zone. Improperly handled, it was dangerous to those relying on it. At Khe Sanh, Marines trusted Claymores like sailors trust lifeboats absolutely, because there was no alternative. Claymores were wired back to bunkers and fighting holes, clackered detonators resting in gloved hands, fingers poised over plungers. Marines memorized the locations of each mine, the angles and arcs of fire. They drilled sequences until reflex made the response automatic. In the dark, with rain soaking everything and artillery rattling teeth, there would be no time to think, only react. The first probes came as the bombardment intensified. North Vietnamese units tested the perimeter, looking for weak points. Small teams would dare Marines to reveal positions. Others crawled close and waited, forcing defenders to endure unbearable tension. The wire was cut in places. The perimeter bent and flexed. And when it failed, when shadowy figures slipped through gaps that should not have existed, Claymores became the final argument. Marines could hear voices just beyond the wire, low and calm, carried by the damp air. Orders passed hand to hand. Metal tools whispered against metal obstacles. A flare would burst overhead, freezing everything in harsh white light. Wire torn open. Bodies pressed flat, eyes reflecting light like animal pupils. Sometimes the enemy froze. Sometimes they ran. Sometimes they kept coming. A clacker depressed in a bunker did not feel dramatic. There was no buildup, just a flat, concussive crack that punched the air, sending a wave of steel outward. The effect was immediate. Attack stalled, collapsed, vanished into screams and silence. Marines learned to fire claymores not in isolation, but in coordinated patterns, overlapping arcs that denied ground and punished concentration. The mines did not win the siege alone, but they bought something invaluable: time. Seconds to reload, moments to call for fire, breathing space to survive another night. The North Vietnamese adapted. They learned to probe for wires, mark suspected claymore positions, trigger mines with poles or sacrificial charges. Every adaptation came at a cost, measured in blood. The ground in front of Khe Sanh became a map of trial and error, written in craters and broken gear. Inside the base, life compressed into routines defined by survival. Marines slept in shifts, boots on, weapons close. Letters from home were read until the paper softened, reminders of a world impossibly distant. Chaplains moved through bunkers, offering words that did not pretend to make sense, only to help men endure. Medics worked until exhaustion blurred vision, patching wounds that never stopped coming. The sound of claymores detonating at night became part of the base's heartbeat, sudden, violent, followed by eerie calm that never lasted. Air power roared overhead day and night. B-52s dropped bombs that shook the earth miles away. Artillery answered every detected movement. Firepower at Khe Sanh reached levels rarely seen. But none of it mattered if the perimeter failed. If enemy infantry broke through in strength, no amount of bombing could save the base. That knowledge sat heavy on every Marine's shoulders. Nights when the wire failed in multiple places were chaos. Listening posts went silent. Flares popped in rapid succession, turning night into white-hot confusion. In those moments, claymores were detonated reflexively. Plungers slammed down as Marines trusted placement and training. The ground erupted in controlled violence. Attack stalled. Marines rearmed mines under fire and placed new ones, ran wires through mud and debris. The perimeter was not static. It was a living, breathing line of defense. The enemy paid attention. Reports recovered later spoke of the claymores with grudging respect, noting effectiveness and psychological impact. To advance knowing a hidden weapon could erase a squad required discipline few armies could sustain. Still, the North Vietnamese pressed, driven by strategic goals and the symbolic value of Khe Sanh. Weeks turned to months. Casualties mounted. The base remained under constant threat yet held. Commanders debated if Khe Sanh was worth the cost of distraction, a trap, or necessary stand. For Marines on the ground, debates felt abstract. Their world extended only as far as the wire, bunkers, and killing zones beyond. Operation Pegasus finally broke the siege in April 1968. Ground forces pushing through to relieve the base. Khe Sanh stood battered but unbroken. The wire had been cut countless times, the perimeter breached in places, but it had never collapsed. Assessments focused on air power, artillery, and strategy. Among men who lived through the nights, there was a quieter understanding of what truly held the line. Claymore mines did not make headlines. They did not roar like bombers or thunder like artillery. They waited in silence, activated by human hands at the precise moment hesitation would have been fatal. They represented the last layer of defense when everything else failed. When wire was cut, flares burned out, darkness closed in, claymores spoke with finality. The story of Khe Sanh is often told in numbers, tons of bombs, rounds fired, days under siege. But beneath those statistics lies the human narrative. Young men gripping detonators in the dark, trusting a simple device would give them another chance at morning. Preparation met reality. Technology served courage. And a perimeter held not because it was invincible, but because it was defended with relentless resolve. Long after the guns fell silent, the ground retained its scars. Craters filled with water. Rusted wire twisted back into the earth. The memory of sudden flashes in the night lingered for those who had been there. They knew, better than any report, how close the base had come to disaster, and how often survival hinged on seconds. The wire failed because wire always fails under enough pressure, but the mines did not. And in that narrow margin between breach and collapse, Khe Sanh endured.